believe I am still technically grounded. A few years ago, I was depressed and not really very social to begin with. At some point, my boyfriend at the time broke up with me and I just snapped. I booked a train ticket to him, around 10h ride, and just left the next morning. Also basically stopped going to work at the same time, from one day to the next. I told no one about the trip and stayed away for about 10 days. When I came back, I had a note from the police on my door about being registered as a missing person. I lived in a student house, so at least everyone on my floor must have seen that note. Turn out my friends had filed a missing person report because I guess work had contacted them. I was angry at the time because I felt like crap and thought nobody cared about me anyway and shouldn't interfere with my life. Ironically, they had just shown that they did, indeed, care. Now I'm grateful that they did it. Late, so this will get buried, but I think it's funny. When I was little I used to love wandering away from my mom when we would go to the store, so she finally decided to let me do it. Circle back around me and follow me while hiding until I started freaking out just to teach me a lesson. One time I got as far as to go up to a security guard and tell him, sobbing, that I couldn't find my mom. She then runs out trying to explain what was going on. He wasn't pleased. It was winter break of my freshman year of college. I had just gotten dumped. I was depressed. I just wanted to be alone. I had a decent amount of money, so I rented an extended stay hotel room for 2 weeks, bought enough food and supplies for 2 weeks, shut off my cell phone and didn't go outside for 2 weeks. When I returned home my family yelled at me for several hours and I had received over 200 phone calls and over 500 text messages. 10/10 would highly recommend. I probably won't recommend this unless you hate your family. I got lost in the mall, and my dad got the information desk to announce my name telling me my dad is looking for me. Scariest day of my life. I got lost for a few hours at a country show when I was very young, 3 or 4 years old. I had been doing that thing where you are following what you think is your parents' legs but turns out it was someone else the whole time. Cause of the crowds I got completely lost. Being so young I just started wandering around on my own. My parents started freaking out. Mother was crying while my dad frantically got the organizers to start looking for me. Luckily after an hour or so I was noticed by a kindly group of older ladies who got hold of a steward to reunite me. This isn't remarkable in itself, but fast forward 20 years later and by coincidence I was at the showground with my parents for another reason. I had completely forgotten about being lost, but it was obviously still ingrained in my parents' minds. As we drove around, there was no show on at the time. My dad points to a spot and goes out of nowhere, "That's exactly where you went missing." And then a few minutes later, and that's where they found you, and both started yattering on about what happened that day. Amazing to think after all these years that incident was fresh in their minds and they could remember it like it was yesterday. They were sort of joking around about it, but you could tell the emotions of almost losing me were still raw. They can't remember where they left the TV remote but can remember the day they almost lost their kid as clear as anything. I guess you never stop being a parent no matter how old your kids get. When I was about 25, I got a letter in the mail to report to jail to serve 10 days for not paying a fine. At the time I was dealing with heavy depression and drank quite a lot, so I said, "Frick it, if you want me to go to jail, come get me." Well, one Sunday morning, they actually came. The cops rang the doorbell like maniacs, while I was still asleep from a stupor the previous night, trying to get me to open the door. I finally woke up when one of the cops was trying to break into my apartment through the back door. The cops told me they'd bring me to jail and asked me if they wanted me to notify someone. In my still drunken haze, I told them no and that I'd call someone myself from jail. Turns out in my country you don't get one phone call when arriving in jail. In fact, it takes 7 days to be properly processed, and during that time, no phone calls are allowed. I thought I'd be getting my phone call on the 7th day, but instead they transferred me to another jail on my 5th day, and at that place they told me the same thing. Processing takes 7 days and you're not allowed to call anybody. In the meantime, my friends and family were going nuts. A friend of mine who had a spare key to my apartment even went looking to check if I was hanging from the ceiling. They all had called the cops repeatedly, who didn't tell them that I was in jail because of some privacy issues reasons, which I don't really understand to this day. When my mom called the cops again, crying, on the 8th day, one officer finally cracked and told them that I was in jail. When I was released from jail and went by a friend's place on my way back home, he was very happy to see me, but he also yelled at me a lot and made me call my parents immediately. Called my parents, lots of crying, lots of yelling, but all in all very happy that I was still alive. Memphis, Tennessee, the summer of 1990. I was 5 years old, and my best friend was this little black girl in my apartment complex. Her parents invited me to her birthday party at McDonald's. We all lived in a very low-income housing projects type of place, so this was basically the height of excess, and I was hardcore excited. So they round up all of us kids and take us in a van to the local MCD's. The party was pretty pimp, cake and stuff, and we were all playing in the little inside playground there. Long story short, I ultimately exit from the playground, and no one was there. The little girl's parents freaking forgot me, packed everyone up and left me there. I didn't realize it at the time, being distracted by food and seemingly awesome covered slides. I was just like, whoa, this is longest part ever. The staff didn't even say anything or notice something was off about an unattended kid just hanging around. 9 hours later, my parents weren't exactly winning any awareness awards themselves. My mom and dad and 3 cop cars finally come to get me. I remember my mom being downright irate because you were the only little blonde haired white girl in a freaking sea of black kids. Not exactly unremarkable. I got lost at a music festival once. I went to sleep in a tent with my boyfriend and best friend, and I guess they woke up around 7 and I wasn't around. They figured I went to the bathroom, so they just waited. After some time they decided to go searching. It must have been not too long after they left that I woke up in the back seat of the car and crawled back into the tent. I must have sleepwalked. Anyway, they ask EMT and other festival goers, and there's a ton of people looking for me. I had no idea. They were making announcements over the speakers and even sent out a text on the system. My boyfriend came back to get his shirt or something and I was all snuggled in. He was reasonably angry. I told him what happened and it was whatever. When my friend finally came back, I told her the same story, at which point she reminded me that we didn't have a back seat because it was full of camping supplies. Still to this day I have no idea whose car I fell asleep in. I was in the Royal Navy and visiting Miami. Some shipmates and I went out to sample the delights of said town, and it was all going well when apparently I disappeared. I turned up about 5 hours later with no idea where I had been. Luckily I didn't have a sore ass and still had my wallet and cash. Odd. People of Reddit, when is one time you have felt genuine, 100% fear? When I was woken up by my dogs going nuts and found out my house was on fire. By the time I had woken up, the stairs were engulfed in flames. I truly lost all sense of what to do. Thought it was all over. Eventually got to a window and ended up throwing my dogs out the window. All were okay, and jumping out the window. I never would wish that feeling on anybody. Your dogs and you make a great team. Running out of gas in my boat with my girlfriend in open water during a storm. Ended up on a shoal trying to hold the boat while a friend brought us more fuel. Honestly thought the waves would wash us away and drown. Driving to Alaska on the Alcan, came around a turn and standing in the road was a mother brown bear and 2 cubs. I was in a 1980 Ford Courier pickup with the exterior body thickness of an aluminum can. I came to a quick halt as she faced the vehicle in a clearly protective stance. and sure if backing up would set her off, I put it in R and sat unmoving for what felt like an eternity until the cub zumbled into the woods and she followed. When I was trying to sleep at around 3 and felt someone press on my bed, then bag on the chair started shaking, then again I felt something on my bed. Finally I had the courage to switch on light and found a giant rat on my bed. My soul was in kind of a slump emotionally for a bit, and while I was at work he texted me and seemed pretty down. I asked him what was up. He didn't respond. I tried calling but he denied my calls. Then suddenly he just wrote "I don't feel too good mentally" and just went offline on all platforms at once and shut off his phone. I just slammed my work laptop shut and ran as fast as I could to the subway to get home. When I finally reached the apartment he wasn't even there. I was so freaked out. I was just screaming his name like mad woman, somehow hoping he'd respond. Everything turned out just fine in the end and he apologized for scaring me. But oh man, I was so sure I was gonna be the one to find his body that day. The time I got into bed with my girlfriend and immediately started coughing up blood, ran into the bathroom and held onto the sink for dear life. Every breath I tried to take I just ended up wheezing more blood out of my lungs. By the time the ambulance got there I had pretty much come to terms that this was how I died. Then it slowed down and finally stopped by the time I got to the ear. Long story short, it turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma. Had chemo for 6 months and am cured now with minimal repercussions. Scariest time of my life. I was on a 360-degree roller coaster and you go around and around, but it got stuck at the very top and the ride shut down for 5 minutes, so I was upside down and I was very little and it was terrifying. This happened to my brother and grandparents. I was too small to go on the ride. I love roller coasters, but those kind still freak me out. Once my mother called me on the phone telling me that a copy of our house keys was stolen that afternoon from the lobby and someone might be in the house. This happened in the exact moment I was entering the house. Pretty scary, but no one was there, thank God. That is some horror film level timing. I was 6 years old and went to take a leak. I was at my grandma's house in a small village in India. The bathroom was an outhouse. Just as I was about to start, I noticed a cobra hissing at me. I ran like heck. Now that is something to be terrified of. I am sure there are no hospitals near a small village. Received a call from my dad, voice faint and weak. A few final words telling me to take care of my mother and sister. Then I woke up, heart rate through the roof, some initial stages of hyperventilation, tears rolling down my eyes, and a huge surge of panic and fear. It took me some seconds to realize it was a dream, but it took over a week to get over what I felt. It's good to know I'm not alone, because this happened multiple times to me already. I am really glad all your loved ones are safe and healthy. I've had similar dreams and they've terrified me to no end. My first mandatory recall for a hurricane. I was recalled for Matthew and it terrified me given how dangerous the hurricane was. For those not familiar with mandatory recall, it is an order to first responders, military, and essential services, gas, electricity, personnel to stay and not evacuate until told otherwise and to continue doing your job. Really bad turbulence at high altitude and a lady yelled through the plane's intercom something I couldn't understand and then kept repeating brace, brace, brace. She kept doing so for a long while, and that plane shook in ways I didn't think possible. I and everyone awake at that moment, about crap our pants. To this day, I cannot experience turbulence without, at least, a minor degree of fear. A couple of very turbulent flights turned me into a horrible flyer. It sucks to be the person crying at turbulence. I was in labor with my son and my blood pressure kept bottoming out. First I lost my vision. It came back. Then I lost my hearing. While I was unable to hear, all of the medical staff in the room suddenly had very concerned looks on their faces and rushed to the monitor tracking my baby's heartbeat. I then started to pass out and as I was losing consciousness I saw a nurse thrust an injection into my leg but I felt nothing because of the epidural. All of that combined was probably the scariest moments of my life. Both my son and I were okay and he's a healthy 1-year-old now. My wife had a mini stroke at 23 while we were hiking in Colorado. I carried her partway down a mountain with pure adrenaline and we raced to a hospital. I thought I was going to lose her because we were way out in the sticks, but they wound up sending her right home and saying she was fine. Somehow hearing knocking through my sound cancelling headphones. It wasn't coming from my headset, it was coming from my front door and no one was there, so I just went back to playing. Heard it again, I decided to watch the door for the rest of the day. I'm still confused to this day on how there was a loud enough sound to go through the headset. Not sure if I was just crazy or whatever else it could have been. When I was around 14 years old, my friends and I were at a mall and the mall went on lockdown because of an active shooter. Turns out it was just a guy shooting the air, but at the time we didn't know that. Everyone assumed the worst case scenario. It was really scary because for the first time in my life it felt like there was a huge possibility I was going to die. This makes it sound like it's somehow normal to just be firing into the air. I once injured a dude's eye by throwing a really sharp broken piece of wood which came off a table. I didn't think it would actually hit as I was so far away. I get him to first aid room or whatever that is called in a primary school. The nurse said he had a high chance of going blind. I don't know what happened later or how is he doing now. My memories from that event are completely gone. I was very scared and so guilty. I'm very sorry, Jack. This didn't happen in EU America. When I was 10 and my mother had a nervous breakdown, she spent the entire night hitting and kicking me while making me tell her I hated her. She's take a break to cry in the bathroom, ordered my sibling and I pizza, but the breaks that night were short before it was back to the abuse. Honestly, that was one of the worst nights of my life, and even after years of therapy I still have nightmares over that. It was seeing her expression change so rapidly they got me and how quickly she snapped. I'm so sorry you experienced that. To have that weird mix of positive, ordering you pizza, in the middle must have been so confusing. I hope you're doing okay now. I remember watching something on YouTube and all of a sudden I had a weird blind spot in my eye. I have a fear of going blind as my eyesight is really bad. It's -7.5 and getting worse. I instantly started panicking, thinking that I am going blind, and ran to my mother, who took me to the doctors. Turns out I had a retinal migraine. I had never heard of a migraine before this, but still, I went into instant panic mode. I get those and with additional numbness in my face and hands. Scary crap. It's hard to remember, but there was one point in the past where I was utterly terrified of my mother. I was in my room and terrified that she'd come in. Pure fair. Bro, why? You good? Cause that don't just come out of nowhere. When my wife almost died during childbirth. Scariest day of my life. Couldn't enjoy the feeling of having my first child because I was too worried about losing my wife and being a single father. A 9 years old on a roller coaster, kinda tall but skinny. The belts and locks are in place. Went smoothly until the last bend before stopping. The safety lock went loose a notch. Almost got jostled out of seat to a 8-meter fall onto metal scaffolds and stuff. Saved by my mother's reflex pulling me back. The mom arm. Stronger than steel. When I went to get the stretcher out of the back of the ambulance when on scene at a cardiac arrest to realize I left it at the hospital, felt like my heart fell out of my ass. I've never been more scared in my life. Last winter I was in the backseat of a truck with my friends. I was in the middle seat and like an idiot I didn't use the seatbelt. We were driving on the highway and over a bridge. We hit ice. All of a sudden we're skidding to the edge of the lane. And I see the 2-foot tall cement wall on the edge getting closer and we're about to slam into it. I knew we'd of course break it and go over. And I knew I was going to die. In 0.2 seconds I thought, this is how I'll die. I wonder if it'll hurt. If I'll die instantly. If I'll bleed out. If my friends will die around me. I knew I was going to die. And then we bounced off the wall. Spun. Hit it again. Spun. And hit it a third time before stopping. The entire thing, from hitting the ice to stopping, took like half a second, but I knew I was going to die. Everyone was okay, surprisingly minimal damage to the truck too. I was on a roller coaster. My belt didn't close and the train began moving, so I screamed for him to stop. It was 100% fear. I had something similar happen to me. My long hair was caught in the mechanism and we were about to shoot upwards. Think of like a power tower. Screaming to stop the ride. All I could imagine was it snapping my neck if it shot up. The guy did, and I actually had to get cut out. Never again will I wear my hair down to an amusement park. The night I thought my abusive ex-boyfriend was going to kill me. He had been drinking and screaming in my face demanding I tell him where his gun was. I hid it before he got home knowing he was intoxicated. Thankfully, the upstairs neighbors heard him screaming and throwing me around and called the cops who showed up before anything serious could happen. That time when a guy stalked me, I was walking to my brother's house, headphones on, so at first I didn't notice him. He followed me for several minutes, then grabbed my shoulder and started yelling at me like a dang possessed. He was yelling that I was a W, that people like me should die and things like that. I was pretty sure he was gonna beat me up, but after that looked like hours of yelling he released me. I ran like I have never ran before, straight to my brother's house, crying all the way. I was working out with a personal trainer, small gym, just for this kind of thing, and we were the only two in there. I finished a pretty rough circuit and he went to the restroom while I recovered. Then I started to feel a tightness in my chest, and pain. I started clutching at my chest, thinking no not now, not like this. I teased too soon, and then I let out the biggest, most powerful burp I've ever had, and immediately felt fine. I'd seen in sitcoms and such where a guy thinks he's having a heart attack and then gets diagnosed with gas, but now I fully understand it. I had a burp like that once. Then when I released it, it took longer than a minute and then I had another panic moment cause I couldn't inhale. I managed to whine help me at my wife before the burp kept going. When it finished, I basically collapsed.